going pop in one of the other four. At the end of the day, it really isn't a video game. And something's going to happen in somebody's physical space when you do something in this fifth domain. Anyhow, so that lays the broad construct. Let me just read a few things to you here, and I'm quoting some folks, but it's based upon what I think I've just laid out for you. So, a consequence of the unique structure of cyberspace is that fundamental precepts that work in the physical world, like risk management, like detection, like monitoring, like attribution, may be less applicable in the virtual world. What I'm trying to set up for you, and the rest of my time with you this morning is going to be suggesting how hard it is to think about combat in the cyber domain, because we're in the habit of taking our experiences from the other four domains, the physical world, and dropping them in here, and they're not working. They're not working at all. Here's an extended quote. Now, just bear with me, but it's really valuable. It's from Martin Libicki of RAND, and he talks about deterrence. Okay? He says, the ambiguities of cyber deterrence contrast starkly with the clarity of nuclear deterrence. In the Cold War nuclear realm, the attribution of an attack was not a problem. The prospect of battle damage was clear. The 1,000th bomb could be as powerful as the first. Counterforce, that is, weapon on weapon rather than weapon on something not a weapon, counterforce was possible. There were no third parties to worry about. Private firms were not expected to defend themselves. Any hostile nuclear use crossed an acknowledged threshold. No higher levels of war existed, and both sides had a lot to lose. Well, I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 9 characteristics that become dogmatic in the physical world with regard to deterrence, and I think I could make an argument that none of the 9 work in cyberspace. So one more quote, this one from Machiavelli. It kind of lays out the challenge we have. There is nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of new things. Welcome to Cyber Command. Let me parse this out with regard to Cyber Command. And again, this is probably very familiar to most of you, but to make sure we're all understanding what we're about here, Cyber Command conducts computer network operations. Okay, CNO in the jargon. If I had a whiteboard here, and if I was doing this for my class at George Mason, I would draw a triangle like that. Okay? And in the middle of the triangle, I would put CNO, Computer Network Ops. And then at each angle, I'd put another 3-letter label that shows the subsets of the big thing. CNO, CND, Computer Network Defense. Pretty self-explanatory. CNE, Computer Network Exploitation. CNA, Computer Network Attack. Okay? Defense, pretty clear. Exploitation. Existing on an adversary network for an extended period of time with the expressed and limited purpose of extracting information from that network. Got it? Extended period of time, somewhat stealthy, extracting information. CNE. CNA. One of those D words. Okay, that information you're extracting or reading over here you apply one of the D words to it. Delay, deny, disrupt, destroy, degrade. That's computer network attack. Okay? So that comprises the universe of CNO. Now, you know, I know, but you really know, that those 3 angles there, D, E, A, technologically and operationally, they're identical. They're all the same thing. All it means is having your way on the net and preventing other people from having their way. but fundamentally, they're the same. Except when you come into the American political system. And you find that C&D has oversight conducted by the Homeland Security Committee. C&E is watched over by the Intel committees, and C&A is watched over by the Armed Services committees. That the authority to do C&D is up here in civil law, C&E is over here in Title 50 in intelligence law, and C&A is over here in Title 10, the laws of armed conflict. That the funding stream for each of those activities, which I just told you are identical, are completely different. With the Intel funding line over here for this, the DoD funding line over here for this, and domestic funding over here for that. If you ever want an example of taking a new idea and trying to shove it into old forms, this is it. Okay? And it makes it hard. It makes it hard for us to do this efficiently. We knew this. This was not a surprise. Before there was the COCOM, before there was the Combatant Command Cyber Command, we had something called JFCCNW, Joint Functional Component Command Net Warfare. It was kind of like a baby cybercom. I was the director, and I was working for the commander of STRATCOM at the time, Jim Cartwright, who's now the vice chairman. I can remember Jim and I going down in front of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, a pretty informal session. It was literally Jim and Mike talking to the senators, saying, please don't beat us up, don't hurt us, but we're going to be moving stuff in between that C&E and C&A thing. It's not dishonest. We're not trying to hide it from you, but it's just the nature of the work. Well, that's a work in progress. Now, let's jump from this creation of the command, which has some problems here, into some of the really core issues about cyber war. The first thing is, what constitutes an attack? Remember my triangle? Okay. Defense, nah. Exploitation, attack. In American military thought, frankly, in American legal thought, an attack is when you do one of those D things. Delay, deny, disrupt, destroy, degrade somebody's information. Over here, under exploitation, we're just sucking, the contents of the Library of Congress out of some defense industrial base every other day. We don't call that an attack. We don't call that cyber war. And I mentioned earlier about we're kind of sloppy with our language. That's C&E. That's exploitation. That's espionage. States do that all the time. CSIS did a study late winter, and they asked citizens of first world nations, and they got it was a scientific survey, and they got good numbers and had confidence in the survey. Who is the most feared nation in cyberspace? And the answer was the United States of America. Without going into any great detail, we're actually pretty good at this. And the Chinese aren't the only ones doing it. I actually, one of the fellows doing the CSIS study was talking about down here, okay? By the way, let me talk for a minute about Chinese espionage, just before I get to this point. As an intelligence professional, I stand back in absolute awe and wonderment at the Chinese espionage effort against the United States of America. It is magnificent in its breadth, in its depth, in its persistence. I think they went to school on Gulf War I, saw their deficiencies, and have frankly decided they're going to build, buy, or steal what it is they need to make that military equation more equal. And although I have no more insight than you as to who is actually conducting these attacks, I understand the general public storyline is that there appears to be a Chinese hand in it, so it could very well be part of this macro espionage effort. Anyway, the folks at CSIS asked me, what should we do about the Chinese doing all this? And it was in the sense that, we need to take some sort of retaliatory action, that we at least got to issue a démarche or something, okay? And knowing my triangle, okay, and knowing what it means, my answer was, what should we do about the Chinese doing all this? I said, you should do what my dad told me to do when I was about 9 years old in Pittsburgh. Quit whining, act like a man, and defend yourself. So the language betrays us. And I'd ask you to be careful in the future when you talk about attacks. There's another really cute thing that happens inside this domain. I mean, you can actually extrapolate this defend, exploit, attack thing. You can actually kind of look through it as a lens and kind of go back into the old physical world. Okay, bear with me here. It takes a minute, but this is actually quite interesting. This is the intel corner, exploitation, right? And this is the ops corner, attack. Okay. In the physical world, and I'm a career intel guy, so I know this. In the physical world, intel is what you do before the ops. Okay. The J2 generally gets a lot busier much earlier than the J3. Because the J2 has got to go out and develop the target and do all those sorts of things, right? And then he hands that information over to the ops guys, and then the ops guys put it together, construct what it is they have to construct, and then go out and conduct the mission, which almost always is far more difficult and certainly far more dangerous than the intel guy back here, perhaps annotating overhead imagery and picking out what we call DIMPs, desired mean points of impact, where to put the bomb. Okay? That's the physical world. Intel precedes ops. Ops is supportive of intel. Intel is a supportive of ops. Intel is in a supporting function. The high-end activity is the operation. When you come to cyber. Come back to me with these two corners down here, exploitation and attack. The attack is always a lesser included capability of the exploitation. It is operationally and technologically far more difficult to reside on an enemy network for an extended period of time undetected. Always far more difficult to do that than to, I'm speaking figuratively here, kick in the front door and melt a cathode ray tube. Okay? And so even in our kind of operational construct, this domain puts different parameters on how it is we even think about military operations. We actually have a pretty good body of thought about defense. I mean, I'm talking not about technology and techniques. I'm just talking about what it is we think we want to do. I think we've got a pretty good idea of what it is we want to do down here on exploitation, since it is, frankly, signals intelligence, and we've got a rich history of that. Down here in this corner, for the attack thing, we're still looking for the big ideas. We're still trying to figure out what are the rules down here. I was told that in the new Cyber Command, about 90% of their thinking is going on down here about attack. 90% of what they're actually doing is up here in defense. And if any of you were in some of the small group meetings I was in